A deep rumble stirs you back to consciousness, an avalanche of ancient books and scrolls causing violent shakes through the floor, and initiating even more piles of tomes to come tumbling down. Waiting nervously for the tremors to subside, you can't help but wonder how in Sigmar's teeth the Loremaster managed to find any particular piece of information in this bizarre library of his. It seemed to be another realm in and of itself, stretching on endlessly into the distance, with towering shelves stuffed with assorted forms of written knowledge from over the ages. You had explored most, if not all, of the Loremaster's home, but this library easily dwarfed all that had come before, and many times over. The entire city of Altdorf could easily fit within this room, reminding you of records you studied discussing the legendary size of the ancient dwarf holds. There is definitely a considerable amount of magic at work in here, though, as the ceiling, if there even was one, stretched up so high to the extent that it was shrouded in darkness. Yet despite this, large chandeliers hung down from immense chains between the various tower-sized shelves, providing pockets of ample light between rows of darkness. Curiously, the lights contained within the chandelier seemed to alter in coloration, depending on the time of day outside the library. When you first fled into the depths of the library, the lights were already transitioning into a soft blue, reminiscent of dusk, before settling into a deep violet during the evening. You're not sure when you collapsed into sleep. You must have stopped to rest for a moment and drifted off into slumber from exhaustion. How long had you been forced to run and hide from that cannibalistic monster? He seemed tireless, pursuing you through the winding corridors of the library until you somehow managed to lose him, at least for a time. Thankfully, he had not located you during the hours that you slept, for now the lights gave off the brilliant shine of day. Day. That means that the evening of Chaos Ascendant is close at hand. Suddenly, you hear another series of crashes, but this time accompanied by a tirade of curses in an all too familiar voice. He's close. You're not sure what the creature is, but it is clear now that he is only an imitation of the Loremaster. Seems to possess all his memories and abilities, though, or perhaps it is simply gifted at crafting fables. Either way, it intends to kill and eat you, thus needs to be dealt with in some fashion. Maybe you can locate something here in the library to combat the creature with, or find a more reasonable hiding spot. No doubt the Loremaster kept his most powerful relics and artifacts somewhere in here. Already you had seen numerous texts with noticeably dangerous abilities, unbound scrolls with writing that enticed you on some primal level to come close and consume their knowledge. Luckily, you knew better than to fall for such a trick without proper wards in place, but perhaps there was something you could use. Hopefully, killing a man-eating shapeshifter was not impossible, assuming your pursuer didn't turn out to be some powerful demon like the infamous Changeling. As you continue wandering through the labyrinthian paths of the library, careful to remain quiet as possible, you come to what seems to be a nexus point. A staggering number of routes branching off from here. But which way to go? You deliberate with yourself for a moment, before noticing that when approaching one of the aisles, the greatly weakened warmth in your chest pulses softly. No voice echoed into your mind like last time, but speed became essential, as the sound of footsteps approached from behind. You run down the indicated path, glancing back for but a moment, and making eye contact with your former teacher, as he charges after you. You will not evade me again. No, I can already feel Morsleb rising over the horizon. It will not be long now until dusk arrives. The great deceiver promised me that I would finally be free of this place, that I could shatter my bindings and roam the world to my pleasure again. All I must do is allow his children into the library, to grant the blue scribes entry, so they might consume this miserable pile of rotten parchment, so he can reclaim that which is rightfully his. But I need the Loremaster's magic that you stole. It should have been mine when that unholy blade impaled him. He should have died. But that cretin passed his power into you somehow, hiding it within your flesh so I could not take it, while he skulked into this giant maze of his. He knew I would betray him. He knew I would not kill you, as I needed someone who could leave the house to tend to the garden lest I become trapped by the overgrown vegetation. I thought you were just a useful tool, a servant that would suffice until the Architect of Fate came to me again. Then you destroyed that disgusting undead weapon for me, showcasing that you had somehow acquired the magic of the Loremaster. I wanted to kill you then, but he told me to wait, to ensure you were healthy and strong in every way, so that there would be enough power to open the doors. That time has come, so all that remains is to devour you, my dear student, and take the power to open the doors for myself. Breathing becomes increasingly difficult as you flee from the monster behind you, your muscles burning with protest at the constant abuse. But you cannot stop now. You can hear the Pretender's voice becoming more ragged, as he seems to finally be tiring as well. If you can just keep going a bit longer, perhaps you will be able to lose him around the next corner. Resisting the aching pangs brought on from thirst and hunger, you put in everything you have when pivoting at the bend for a final sprint, until your lungs feel like they're going to burst. Looking behind you to see just how much distance you have to work with, pain explodes through your body as you slam directly into a wall of stacked books at full speed. Tumbling into a brutal roll as books fly in every direction, your vision spins until you come to a sudden stop with rib-cracking force. Sheer agony tears through your mind as you struggle to breathe, all the wind knocked out of you by the impact. As the dust settles from your collision, a peculiar glass orb with luminescent blue motes floating within comes bouncing from where it had rested atop the pile, bumping painfully into your chest and cracking. Grimacing from the torturous grind of damaged bone against bone, you struggle to read the small written label on the glass, before detecting movement mere yards from you. The cannibal creature emerges from the looming darkness, his teeth all on display in a cruel smile. Realizing that your death approaches, you weakly grab hold of the glass with both hands, before hurling it with what might you still have. The makeshift projectile sails through the air, the Pretender raising his arms to shield his face in brazen defiance as the glass shatters against him. His flesh and clothing are torn asunder by the rain of shards that spin in every direction, blood pouring from his wounds and blue flecks briefly showering around him before he resumes walking towards you. Hoping that one of the sharp pieces might miraculously cut some vital vein, your heart sinks as you watch the creature's flesh knit closed. But then his clothing repairs as well, and he pauses for a moment, seeming amused by your look of confusion, his grinning somehow widening even further. The fake Loremaster gestures to his face before bowing low in an exaggerated fashion. When he slowly rises back to standing, horror grips your chest as you see that his face is no longer the one you've grown accustomed to, but instead is a perfect mirror of your own. Before your very eyes, the creature's entire body begins to writhe and alter, even his trappings snapping and wavering as if caught in a great gust of wind. Within several heartbeats, the monster before you no longer bears the visage of the Loremaster, but instead is a flawless recreation of you. Ah, I had just about finished using that form anyway. You will have to forgive me for using the Loremaster's voice instead of yours. I still have need for that particular feature of his. I must admit, it is so refreshing to have the vigor of youth coursing through my veins for the first time in... goodness, I'm not sure how long it's been. Time somewhat loses its meaning when you spend enough of it in this damnable prison. I had intended to be polite and wait to take your form until after I devoured you. But you have been quite the thorn in my side today. I always wondered if it would be particularly demoralizing to be eaten by one's own image. I'll have to ask how you're feeling once I have finished eating your legs to ensure no more irritating sprints. Weren't you ever taught not to run in libraries? So uncivilized. Though all that exercise did work up my appetite. And I can just tell you are going to taste wonderfully. It seems I may have pressed myself a little in that pursuit. Let me just... What is happening? You broke your ribs during that fall, didn't you? But no, I should not have inherited that. Do you have some form of asthma? No. Then you would... Amidst the coughing fit, the creature wearing your image tries to approach, his entire body shaking from the effort, before his next step falters and he stumbles onto the ground. For the first time since arriving in this strange home, you see fear in his widening eyes, panic seeming to set in. Growling with effort, his face twists with inhuman rage as he vainly reaches for you. You back away as best you can, every movement causing fresh searing pain to explode in your sternum. Managing to squirm far enough away until your back is pressed against a shelf, you can only watch as the creature slowly crawls towards you. He extends his right arm in a desperate attempt to reach you, but the cannibal is forced to retract as the harshest fit yet overtakes him. Covering his mouth with the back of one hand, the coughing seems to briefly subsist when the pretender nearly vomits out a thin, filmy material. The creature glances down at the phlegm, his eyes narrowing. What is wrong with my body? What is the... blue spots? No, that's impossible! This cannot exist so far from the Chaos Wastes. Even the Loremaster would not dare keeping such... Your twisted twin suddenly flops over in agony, clawing at his chest in desperation as sheer terror crosses his face. Only a few meters away, you're able to make out disgusting tendrils writhing just underneath his skin. Clearly in deep suffering, the creature screams out a horrible, animalistic wail one last time, before his torso bulges as something within rapidly expands. With a wet, ripping sound, a mass of flailing blue tentacles, each at least the length of your arm, bursts from the pretender in an explosion of gore. The flagella comprising the horrific organism lash themselves around the monster's arms, his muscles, your muscles, straining in protest, but they're no match for the swarm. Bones audibly snap as his arms are bent at impossible angles away from his face. The main mass of tentacles then spear directly at your copy's head, slamming against his clenched teeth and coiling around his mouth. Thousands of appendages gripping tightly with such impressive force that they shatter the pretender's jaw, wrenching open his mouth. Before your former teacher can even emit a final sound, the tentacles force themselves down his throat. He struggles for only a few moments longer, his eyes bulging from a combination of shock, terror, and indescribable suffering. You meet his gaze and watch grimly as the light of life fades away. The entire ordeal only took a handful of seconds, but watching yourself, in a sense, be torn apart and mercilessly slaughtered by some alien horror felt as if it took years. Watching his body warily for any further movement as blood pools beneath him, it seems that the organism died along with its host. Letting out a sigh of relief, you grunt with effort as you slowly climb to your feet. After taking a tentative step, the sound of sliding glass catches your attention, and you look down to see fragments of the orb you had thrown earlier scattered about. One stands out, as it has a label with the following words scribbled upon it: Tendrophilus Fungus. Warning: do not inhale spores under any circumstances. Well, explains that then. Bracing against the wall for effort to begin limping away, you hear a bizarre sound similar to the ones the Loremaster's fake made when he transformed into you earlier. Whirling around with gritted teeth, ready for one final battle, you instead see that the body has shifted form again. On the ground, where your copy had once been, instead was an even more nightmarish scene. Laying still with dead eyes and blue tentacles sprouting from its chest and mouth is a skinless humanoid, like some horrifying anatomy diagram brought to life. All of the entity's muscles and organs out on open display. You had heard mention about such a creature in your studies. They were called doppelgangers, magically crafted homunculi that can only be created using the dread sorceries of chaos. So rare as to be mistaken for myth, but impossible to detect, as they can copy someone's appearance, mannerisms, and even their skills to an extent simply by looking at them. Disgusting. You begin sliding down the corridor between shelves, not entirely sure where to go. How the Loremaster navigates the library at all, much less find the exit, was a question for the ages. You glanced up at the lights above, and saw them slowly starting to change color. Wouldn't be much longer until night fell, and Geheimnisnacht began. Cursing the pain that radiated with each movement, you managed to get most of the way down the path, when the distinct sound of loud, wet footsteps comes from behind. Groaning in exasperation, you lean against the books and slowly spin around. Sure enough, to just keep a perfect day going, you see the skinless corpse of your teacher waddling towards you. With blank eyes staring up at nothing, the zombie stumbles forwards with arms outstretched, ready to pull you to a no doubt horrific death. You close your eyes, far too exhausted to run anymore, and simply slump down to the floor. At least it wasn't going to eat you, seeing as the creature's mouth was still stuffed with tentacles. You contemplate your experience these last few months, considering all the strange and terrifying creatures you've learned about. All in all, it wasn't too terrible. The skinless cannibal managed to be a fairly decent cook, so that was something. Making peace with your bizarre journey through life, and offering prayers to every half-decent god you could think of, you prepare for the end. The lazy steps come closer and closer, until at last, you figure the zombie is roughly only a few paces away. Suddenly, a thunderous boom rings out that nearly deafens you, your eyes snapping open, only to begin stinging as dust falls into them. Trying to make out what is going on through the tears building in your eyes, your nose becomes overwhelmed by the distinct odor of gunpowder? Through the haze, an open hand emerges, slamming into your chest, where a bright light immediately radiates out. Knocked breathless by the protest from your broken ribs, you gasp and finally open your eyes wide to see a somewhat familiar face leaning over you. So sorry about that, my friend, but I needed to take back what I allowed you to borrow for this next bit. Fungus zombies are tenacious bastards, even before they're made from the chaos-tainted remains of a doppelganger. The Loremaster, looking far more haggard, flashes you a tired smile, before turning, standing back up, and glaring down the path. Braced against his shoulder, you see a bizarre device, looking similar to a dwarf handgun, but heavily augmented, and bearing a second barrel above the first. Following his stern gaze, you see the fungus zombie dragging itself towards the both of you, despite having most of its torso and the right arm completely blown off. The Loremaster holds up his free hand and roars out an incantation. The horrid creature before you slowly surrounded by a shimmering barrier of light. Seeming to sense its impending demise, the zombie begins to horribly bloat up, the tentacles all swelling, and moments later, exploding. Thousands of fresh spores try to launch into the air, but their spread is arrested by the containment magic. The Loremaster intones another spell, his eyes shining with a gleaming inner light as the magic surges through him. Finishing a complex gesture, flames ignite around him and form into the shape of a shrieking phoenix before descending upon the ruined corpse of your former teacher, incinerating everything within the barrier with white flames until only ashes remain. A heavy silence descends upon the library. You cannot help but stare up at the man before you, thrown off by how disheveled and thin he looks. After a tense few moments, he lets out a long sigh of relief, seeming to almost sink into himself before turning to face you. Well, then. That is the end of that, I suppose. I'm sure you have questions, but not yet. Close your eyes and get some rest. I will need your aid before the night comes, and it will take me a bit to heal your wounds anyway. You did very well, my friend. All will be explained soon enough. Sleep now. The Loremaster holds his hand out towards you, and a pleasant warmth courses through your body, melting away your pains and guiding you into the gentle embrace of sleep. The last thing you take in before falling back into darkness is the hint of an immense scar peeking out from the top of the Loremaster's robes. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this episode of the Monstrous Arcanum, double featuring the Tendrophilus Fungus, and of course the true identity of the so-called Loremaster, the Doppelganger. A bit more will be revealed about the Doppelganger's story, and of course the actual Loremaster in the finale episode which airs later tonight, so I hope you all enjoy what happened in this one. If so, please punch that like button to give me some feedback. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, as we have a tremendous amount of excellent content coming out later today, and you won't want to miss it. Real quick, I want to thank all of my patrons for their support, and of course give a hefty shout out to the Lordly Kings, Sign of the Emperor, Eric, Charles Bode, Wendell Short Eyes, Jeffrey Ramers, CJ Ubusta, and Higgins the Seagull. I'll see you guys this afternoon for the big announcement of the winners from the art contest, and then of course when night falls, the grand finale episode of the Monstrous Arcanum shall be unleashed. Happy Halloween. Bye guys.